Being a teacher in the community where I teach, it's extremely emotionally challenging work because of the struggles that they have outside of my classroom. But it's so incredibly powerful to be able to welcome 25 kids into a room and know that they feel safe and that they know that they can be themselves. And to have the opportunity to do that is extremely rewarding to me.
Welcome to the SGV Master Key, a show where you will hear personal stories of triumph over failures and how others successfully navigated the unique landscape that is the San Gabriel Valley. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we have chosen the San Gabriel Valley for our home or businesses or both. We believe it is the people and small businesses that make this community great, and we love to share their stories with you. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at sgvmasterkey.com. Here are the hosts for the show, Russell Mono and Scott Warmoth.
All right, welcome to another episode of the SGV Master Key. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope to bring you another interesting guest today. And if you're watching this instead of listening, I am wearing the same shirt again, as I often wear it. In the beginning of the show, I used to change it all the time, and I thought, there's a week in between. They probably forget.
Yeah, right. Well, now they don't, because you just told them.
Well, if you're a fan of this show, first of all, thank you. But you probably have heard some history on Scott and his involvement with community, being, I think, what you referred to as the youngest councilman in the U.S.
Yeah, and I believe I was the youngest in the U.S. I certainly was the youngest in the state of Washington when I was elected.
And you were running, or you started your campaign when you were 17, knowing that you would be 18 at the time of...
Right, because it would have had to be 18 to be elected. I had to be a voter. But I was able to start, when I was 17 to put it into place.
And we've had many guests, several guests on this show who are active in the community and want to bring about change and influence things. And that's a part of who you were at that time.
Right. And, being in politics is one thing, but there's another way of influencing as well, and it's the people that are teachers, or community organizers, people involved in the community. They don't have to be politicians. And they're the most valuable people in the community to me, just because I think it's so important to help mentor and educate young people.
Sure. And that brings us to our guest today. Our guest is a teacher and community organizer, Jennifer Tang. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you have a connection with one of my good friends, Danny. But what is your connection to the San Gabriel Valley?
Well, I have lived here in the San Gabriel Valley, specifically Monterey Park, since I was 10. My parents, when I was born, we lived in Chinatown in LA. And for the first 10 years of my life, they saved up all of their money so that they could buy a home in the suburbs. And that brought us to Monterey Park when I was 10. And so, in adulthood, I've come and gone a little bit, but in the last few years, I decided to really settle down back home and help contribute to the community that made me. So I am now a homeowner in Monterey Park and setting down roots, or deeper roots here again.
So we mentioned that you're a community organizer, and you just said that, helping your community. What fostered that in you? Because that's not something that everybody is like, I'm going to, want to help my community.
I think a big piece of that comes from being a teacher. So I didn't always think I would be a teacher. I very much had lots of different interests as a student. I started out when I was in college, my very first food service job was in fashion. I thought I was going to be a fashion writer. Didn't like that. I tried out a bunch of other things, and the thing that stuck was being a teacher. I started out my teaching career in Arizona, in Phoenix, in 2011, and this is in Maricopa County in 2011. And if you know anything about the politics there, Sheriff Joe Arpaio was the sheriff at the time. And I taught in a very low-income community. I had students who were heavily impacted by the policies that were set forth by the sheriff. And I just felt so helpless in the face of that. You know, I felt like, how could I teach my kids how to read if they're scared that their parents are going to be deported that afternoon? How could I teach my kids how to write if they weren't sure if they were going to have food on the table at the end of the day, right? And so being a teacher was really important to me, but I felt helpless unless I understood how to affect change on policy. And so that's why I kind of started learning about community organizing and just learning about the policy world, the political world, so that I could help push for policies that would help my kids and therefore help me do my job better.
Well, that was in Arizona. And then what brought you back to San Gabriel Valley?
I just missed home. My parents are still here. My entire extended family is here. My friends were here. So I left Arizona. I came back. And I was so burnt out from teaching. I left the classroom for 4.5 years. I just thought, this is not a job I can do. It's too hard. There's got to be something else I could do. So I went into the private sector. And I worked, the first 2 years out of teaching, I worked for Nolan Bushnell, who was the founder of Atari. And it was so cool. I got to develop educational video games for a startup that he had co-founded. And I was living out on the west side working on this, and you know, as startups go, that startup didn't end up working out. And then I jumped to another startup where I was then working with students from across Southern California. I was helping to mentor students from over 200 different high schools in Southern California. And that was fantastic too. I really got a sense of skills that I didn't know I had, like sales, like product development. And that was right around the time of the 2016 election. And once the 2016 election happened and the results were what they were, I thought the best place for me right now is back in the classroom. So I found, figured out my teaching credential stuff and got a teaching job back here in California. And I've been there ever since, working in Huntington Park.
So I'm interested in your, going back to the beginning, what shaped you and what formed you. So you probably don't remember too much about Chinatown, but that's where you spent the first 10 years of your life. Mm-hmm. And then you moved to Monterey Park. So what was your childhood like? What did you like to do? What were your activities? Where did you go to school? Yeah, I'm just interested in what shaped you.
I remember a lot about Chinatown because all of it was so different than what I experienced when we moved to the suburbs. And that move helped me understand poverty. And when I was 10 and under, I didn't realize that we were living in poverty, but we were. My parents are Cambodian refugees, and we lived in a community where there were a lot of other Cambodian refugees. And we always had food on the table. I always felt safe, but there were 5 of us living in a small apartment. I was an only child at the time. And I just remember, feeling this sense of everybody was my auntie and my uncle. There were kids running around everywhere. And my parents were just at work all the time. I went to Castellar Elementary, which, if anybody's familiar with Chinatown, is the elementary school. And I'm very proud to have gone there because that's where the educators there taught almost all refugee children, right? How to read and write and become fluent in English. And when I moved to Monterey Park and I understood what having space was like and having a park was like, I just really, even at 10 and 11, understood the difference between what it meant to grow up in a poorer community and what it meant to grow up in the suburbs.
And so it was just that your family had put together some money mm-hmm. over the years and were able to get a house. Mm-hmm. And did you have brothers and sisters?
My sister was born 9 months after we moved. Mm-hmm. So my parents, my parents chose, to my understanding, chose not to have another child when I was younger because we couldn't afford to support another child. But once we moved out here, I went from a 2-bedroom apartment to a 4-bedroom house on a cul-de-sac, right? And so it was just such a big difference in life. I remember we used to have these metal bars on our windows in our apartment in Chinatown. And my grandfather lived with us until he passed away when I was 16. And when we moved to Monterey Park, he said, "Wait, we don't have bars on the windows here. we should get bars on the windows. And I was like, you're right, we should have bars on the windows. How could we not? But obviously we didn't need them here. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is very different than what I had before.
Where did you go to school?
I went to, after Castelar, Hillcrest Elementary in Monterey Park, Garvey Intermediate, and then Mark Keppel High School.
Okay.
And then for college, I graduated from USC.
Hillcrest, is that next like a store called Hi-Ho Market?
No, that is Highlands.
Highlands.
On
okay.
the other side of Monterey Park. But yes, all the different schools have, all the people from Monterey Park know all the different elementary schools each have their thing.
Yeah. I don't know where Highland is. Where is that?
It's on the far western side of Monterey Park. And then Hillcrest is on the far eastern side.
Okay. And so I didn't know that you went to Garvey and then also Mark Keppel.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, we've had a lot of stories of immigrants or immigrant parents, and their experience growing up. And it's interesting that the way you're describing that apartment and the move, but that you didn't know until you had the contrast, right? I didn't know that I was poor until much later, maybe as an adult. I didn't really realize that. But what was going through your mind at that time when you were transitioning in from this apartment to the house in the suburbs?
I mean, I think what stood out to me most was just why doesn't everybody have this, right? It felt like a very inevitable thing to happen, which I know now as an adult isn't inevitable. Not everybody can come to this country as my parents did. Like my father, who had $12 to his name when he came to this country, build a small business and make enough money to be able to buy a house in the suburbs. But at the time, it felt very inevitable. And that's because in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was this massive, not massive, but in my community, a lot of movement from Chinatown, from Echo Park to the San Gabriel Valley. I remember after we moved here, my dad had all these friends that he would watch football with, and they eventually all bought houses in Monterey Park, Alhambra, San Gabriel, Rosemead, and made their way here too and became homeowners. And so at that time, it seemed really inevitable that that's just what you did after a certain number of years. I remember I had a friend, he's still my friend to this day, who sat next to me in 3rd grade at Castelar Elementary, and then in 5th grade ended up in my class at Hillcrest because his family had also moved out here. So it was just this kind of migration that was happening at that time.
Is there a large Cambodian population in Chinatown, or was there when you were there?
There was when I was there. So I am ethnically Chinese.
Okay.
I speak a language called Chuchao or Teochew. Shout out to all my Kakinangs out there. But we are an ethnic minority in Cambodia. My parents were both born in Cambodia, as were a couple of my grandparents, and they ended up there because they were escaping the Cultural Revolution in China.
Okay. So, not to stereotype, we had Michael and Hood on the show, and they are Cambodian, and so they were talking about the Cambodian community. So I didn't know that they're well, I guess it's a different pocket, right? If you're Chuchao. So what happens next?
You mean from this point?
Yeah. What happens next? So you feel like this is supposed to happen, sort of, right? Mm-hmm. And you're now living in Monterey Park. And what changes in your life now?
When I was, I head off to college. I did well academically. I kind of did the things you were supposed to do as a first-generation American, except I chose to be an English major, which would thoroughly upset my parents because they were like, you already speak English.
They wanted you to be some sort of professional, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. My mother wanted me to be a pharmacist, and I said, well, I got a C- in chemistry. It's not going to happen. And I chose to become an English major because telling stories was really important to me. I felt like there were just so many stories in the San Gabriel Valley within my friends and family that weren't told. And I wanted to learn how to communicate better to tell those stories, which is why I'm so excited that your podcast exists. But, I go off to college and I try to figure out what to do with my life with an English major. And when I was 21, I decided I would go to Cambodia by myself and become a teacher for a few months. And so I did. I was there for like the summer between my third and fourth years of college. I was a volunteer teacher teaching students English. My students were between the ages of 15 and 65. And I did that, 5 days a week. And that was a life-changing experience for me. I also happened to be in the country at the same time the International Tribunal was happening for Deutsch, who is the second or third in command in the Khmer Rouge. And I got to see that unfold in the country while I was there teaching. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to teach, and I'm going to find ways to help people access more power within the systems that surround them. And, more or less, that's what I've been doing since then.
Well, the irony is that I believe you said your grandparents, maybe it was your parents, but they wanted to escape the Cultural Revolution, but then they found themselves right in the mess of Pol Pot and all of that. And they just went from one terror to another terror and then escaped to the U.S., right?
Yeah. They are so incredibly lucky. I think they would agree. I became really obsessed with studying what happened in Cambodia when I was a teenager, because growing up, I'd always hear things like, well, back in Cambodia, I would go 2 weeks without eating, or whatever the case was when I was a kid and I was a picky eater. I'd hear things like that. And I thought, well, what do you mean by that? What happened there? And, my parents didn't necessarily know or didn't know how to educate me on it. So I went to the library and started reading a lot of books, much to their disappointment, because they don't want to talk about it,
Well, of course, yeah. They won't talk about it. But I'm so happy that you researched your history, because, you see a lot of, I guess, history being ignored or rewritten or thrown out, in Asia. And it's a horrible thing that happens. And you actually were able to discover what was happening. And so was your focus on the killing fields time?
Yeah, I studied, when I was in college, I majored in English and I minored in international relations. And I had the opportunity while I was in college to work with a professor named Professor Kosopath, who is Cambodian. And he was doing a lot of work with the Cambodian Documentation Center, and they were trying to preserve this history. The Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot and the folks in his ranks kept a lot of records, and their job was to try to preserve all of it. So I helped him a little bit with his research. And I studied essentially post-colonialism, so after the French left Indochina, all the way until my family left the country, trying to answer this basic question of just why? Why would any leader, right, any political leader, military leader, what have you, why would they go through the process of killing over 2 million of their own people? How could anybody be this cruel? I can't tell you that I have an answer. I don't. But that was what I was trying to answer when I was, a teenager and in my early adulthood.
You may not have an answer, but what did you learn?
I learned that people like my parents, who were of the merchant class, were targeted. I learned that my parents didn't speak their native language for 4 years.
Because they were Chinese?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So were the Chinese targeted more than, say, Cambodians?
Yeah, they were, and somehow my family mostly survived. They had to hide the fact that they were of the merchant class. Chuchao people in Cambodia and in Southeast Asia in general tend to be business people. And so they were targeted because their business dealings contradicted what agrarian communism promoted. And so, my family lost a lot during that time in terms of material possessions, land, things like that. But they left with their lives, and that's more than a lot of other people, unfortunately, had.
That's interesting, right? So a lot of these stories of parents exist, but not a lot of them, maybe even very few, are passed on.
And they won't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
You are one of the few, I would say, that went to research, right? Went to research actually what happened. So how much of this influences what you do today?
It influences it a lot. I see a lot of, so I teach in a community, if folks aren't familiar with Huntington Park, where there's a lot of poverty, and I'd say almost all of my students are immigrants or children of immigrants, mostly from Central America and Mexico. And I've had the opportunity to use my education to kind of be pulled out of poverty. And my students very much believe that as well, right? That if they study hard in school, that if they work hard, that they'll be able to make it out. And what I try to teach them, what I try to hopefully instill in them is that it's not about like making it out and moving to Beverly Hills or somewhere else, right? It's about learning the skills that you need in order to uplift your entire community. And so I hope that in 10, 15, 20 years or more, that my students will hold that as they, start their careers and start making money and return to their neighborhoods and help uplift others who don't necessarily have the opportunities that they've had.
You can't do what you do without having a great sense of hope. You must be an optimist, right? I mean, so I'm really curious about the hope. What kind of hope you feel? How did you develop? What is the hope that you feel? And I'm also very curious about what frightens you, because you've seen frightening things as you researched history. But today in America, what frightens you? But what is it that gives you hope as well?
I am very much an optimist. I'm reminded of that every day because I'm married to a pessimist. But I don't know exactly where I get that hope. I guess it would be from what I've witnessed in my own life, right? Seeing what's possible in this country.
So you talk about this country. Is it an American dream?
I very much question the existence of the American dream over the last few years. Up until I would say like my mid-20s, I very much vehemently believed in it. Everything I did was working towards that and enabling more people to access the American dream. As I've gotten more into politics and policy, I question whether it's available to everyone now. And that's why I also do organizing work and policy work, right? Because I think those are the levers that we have to pull if we're going to make the American dream possible for everyone. And when I say American dream, I as cool as it is to not be patriotic or nationalistic, right, because of the last 4 years that we've gone through, I very much believe that our country is special in that way, that if we work hard enough, if we start building our systems a little bit differently, that everybody can access that mobility that so many people want.
You question whether it's available or not available to everybody. Who is it not available to? Your family had as difficult a situation as could be imagined, and you saw them grow out of it and into this different kind of life. But who do you see that is, suffering? Who needs the help?
I mean, there's a lot of people, but I think the way that I largely view this lack of access is the distribution of wealth and what's accessible to certain generations. And so I'm a millennial, and I'm a very proud millennial, right? We are mostly in our late 20s, early 30s, heading into 40 right now. And that access to wealth is very difficult for many of my peers to get. Having graduated college with myself over $60,000 of student debt, right? And that those sorts of roadblocks have really made it difficult for folks, as much as they might have high-paying jobs, as much as they might have support from family. It's hard for people to build the same kind of wealth that I saw my parents be able to build in my lifetime, right? And so I think that as we think about how to make it more accessible, it's just, we have to consider the realities of what people are facing nowadays, whether that's crippling student debt, whether that's just the cost of housing, or the fact that wages have been pretty stagnant for a long time. When we look at all of those things, I think policymakers need to start thinking about the solutions that need to happen aren't necessarily the ones that worked for my parents' generation or folks before them.
Do you get from that the answer is generational then, rather than specific community?
It seems to be an age or a generation that is suffering.
I'm sorry. I'm curious. How do you define the American dream?
We talk about this in my class every year. I teach AP English Literature, and we read The Great Gatsby. And so this is always how I start this unit with my seniors who begin reading this book. And I ask them, what do you think it means, and do you think it exists? At the beginning, when I started teaching this book about 4 or 5 years ago, the majority of my students said, yes, it exists. And what it means is the ability and the freedom and the opportunity to do things like earn money, buy a house, support your family. And it varies for different people from the definitions I've seen. I kind of ascribe to that definition too, the ability, opportunity, and freedom to have economic success and do what you want with your money, right? What I've seen over the last 5 years is that fewer and fewer students every year believe in its existence. And I think that's really interesting. And they now kind of define it a little bit differently. They define it more so as the ability to be who you want to be, whatever that means to you. And so they've kind of moved away from the economic piece of it and moved towards a more social or identity-based definition of the American dream, which I think is really interesting. And I wonder if that's because the economic piece just seems less accessible to my kids now, or if they just, aren't thinking about it in terms of economics anymore. But that's kind of the shift I've seen over the last just five years.
You mentioned you teach in Huntington Park, but you teach at something like a charter school. Mm-hmm. And what are the demographics of your students?
My students are, we teach about like 520 or so students. It's a very small school. Our students are all from the surrounding neighborhoods, so Huntington Park, Southgate. They're almost all Latino. I have a couple of students who are of Middle Eastern or of Asian descent, a couple of Black students, and maybe one white student, but largely Latino. And
what I remember about Huntington Park is that it is almost exclusively Mexican, not from other countries, not from Central America, but I believe 97% Mexican is what I remember. Does that seem correct to you?
Yeah, I mean, we do have some students from Central America who are more newcomers, who are my English learner students. Largely, though, my students are either from Mexico or their families are from Mexico, yeah.
I remember Danny sharing stories of teaching in the inner city and the struggles that the kids would go through, like not eating over the weekend. Like that was unreal to me. I couldn't even imagine that. But do you deal with things like that at a charter school? Yeah, we do. There's really not a big difference between charter schools and traditional public schools in terms of the students that we get. We have lots of stories like that, and lots of instances of, especially during the pandemic, of students not showing up to class because they were picking up odd jobs to be able to support their families. The pandemic hit my students and their families very, very hard. Every week, there was a period of time last November to January where every week I was getting a couple emails telling me that so-and-so's father passed away, so-and-so's aunt passed away from COVID. And so you really see the discrepancy in terms of how much more heavily the pandemic and also, economic issues, food access issues, housing issues impact my students and their families. And so when I say I teach and do community organizing work on the side, it's because I feel like it's so necessary to be able to help affect some sort of change to help them with the other things that they might need support with. Do you feel a pull or a draw towards this particular community over, let's say, somewhere, in the San Gabriel Valley? For a long time, I really wanted to come and teach in the San Gabriel Valley. I still think I might someday. Right now, I feel a really strong pull, especially post-pandemic, to the community where I teach, because I feel like, I think all teachers feel this way, but I feel like I have really, really powerful impact there, because every year I come in with
I come in and I have another 120 children who are mine. I very much feel like they are my kids. And I don't have kids of my own yet, but I tell my friends and my husband this all the time. Being a teacher in the community where I teach, it's kind of like cracking your heart open and just like giving it to these children who then, it just kind of gets tossed around for a year. It's extremely emotionally challenging work because of the struggles that they have outside of my classroom, but it's so incredibly powerful to be able to welcome 25 kids into a room and know that they feel safe and that they know that they can be themselves in my class for that hour and a half, right? I don't know if a lot of people can say that about their jobs. And to have the opportunity to do that is extremely rewarding to me.
Do they soak it in? Do they, take what you teach and make it a part of themselves?
I think they largely do. I most recently taught 9th grade, which is a hard year. I used to teach middle school when I taught middle school in Arizona, and I said I'll never teach middle school again because they should just go out and do manual labor all afternoon. They have so much energy. But high school is when people are trying to learn who they are, right? And to be able to witness that is such a great privilege. And to be able to be myself and allow them to be themselves in a space is really, really powerful. In the last few years, there's been a lot more awareness about gender identity amongst my students and hopefully the greater world. But I've had students who have come out to me as trans, who have come out to me as gender non-binary, and as various other, non-cisgender identities. And I realized, wow, the fact that I've created a space where they feel safe enough to let me know that and to exist as who they feel they truly are, I think is my greatest accomplishment as an educator.
You also have gotten involved in politics, though. What is your history in politics?
So I ran for Monterey Park City Council in March of 2020. My election ended like the week before the pandemic officially started in California. And I came in second place in a crowded 4-person race behind the winner by 118 votes. It was quite the experience. If I had been elected, I would have been the youngest councilwoman in the San Gabriel Valley at the time. And it was a fantastic learning experience. Afterwards, I went on to work as a campaign manager for a current council member who is the youngest council member or councilwoman in San Gabriel Valley, Sasha Renee Perez, of the city of Alhambra. And then I've since gotten very involved in Democratic state politics and things like that.
Do you plan to get involved in another election?
We'll see. The great thing about running a campaign that I am proud of is that people ask me that a lot now. And, I have a lot of different opportunities I'm thinking about, but ultimately it's going to come down to where I feel like I'll have the biggest impact and where I feel like my skill set will be put to best use. And so, yes, tentatively, but I'm not sure exactly, what capacity yet.
But those activities really take a lot of time, a lot of involvement.
They do, yeah. When I ran my campaign, I didn't have any paid staff. I had a mail consultant to help me with my mailings that went out to voters. And I had like a coach essentially, but I didn't have any paid staff. I'll probably get paid staff if I do it again, just so I have a little bit more support.
Sitting here listening to you speak, you definitely resonate with me as an optimist, and I'm interested in how you affect change in the community and in your classroom. But let's take a quick break, and we'll come right back.
The legal process can be intimidating. You don't know where to start, and you're unsure of what to expect. The attorneys and staff at the law offices of Scott Warmoth have been serving the San Gabriel Valley for over 35 years, helping people just like you navigate through the legal process and ensuring you're treated fairly. You can find them at law888.com or call 626-282-6868. That's 626-282-6868.
All right, we're back with Jennifer. Jennifer, before the break, I was mentioning that I was interested in your methods in affecting change in the classroom and the community. But actually, before that, we ask each guest to bring an item of significance. And what did you bring with you?
So I brought this gold necklace, and it has a jade pendant on it. It's a little tangled right now, but my mother gave this to me, and I decided to bring this because I wanted to share a story from my childhood in Chinatown. So we lived in an apartment building that had 10 units, and one day I was home alone with my grandfather, and one of the apartments caught fire. And the fire trucks were coming. We weren't sure if the whole building was gonna go up. And I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. And I went into my parents' bedroom and I grabbed their go bag. And as a child, my parents always told me, like, if anything happens, if there's a big earthquake, if there's a fire, if we have to run, you grab this bag. And I thought that was really normal. And you would think, like, today I have a go bag for earthquakes. It has, like, water and cash and a first aid kit. This was a bag full of cash and jewelry, like gold. And I learned later on, as I got older and I started doing research, that the reason why my parents had a go bag full of gold is because when they were growing up, that was their go bag in Cambodia. I heard stories growing up of my aunts and my uncles having to swallow small nuggets of gold to escape because they would use that as currency to be able to get what they needed to get, whether that was to get across to the Thai border or whatever the case is. And so I remember when I was in school, I always wore like something gold because my mother always gave me something gold to wear. And as I met other students who were children of refugees, they told me the same thing, that their parents said, you always have to wear gold earrings or a gold necklace because if things start happening, you will have currency. And I thought, wow, like, these methods of survival are now being passed on to us, right? And obviously, in the US, you don't think, I need to have a stash of gold in case society breaks down. But this gold necklace is one of the ones that was in that bag that now we don't have anymore. My parents have adjusted to life and they don't have a gold bag like this anymore. But, now we actually wear the jewelry. And this always reminds me of that day when we had that fire and, of all the things we were going to save, this is the most valuable.
Can you share the necklace over here? So for the listener, it's like she said, a gold, and it looks like in the shape of not quite a heart, but maybe just
I think it's supposed to be like a lotus or something.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
So going back to your community organizing in your classroom, share a little bit more about that with us. Yeah,
when I first started being a teacher, I was really ineffective. I was just bad at it. My students didn't want to listen to me. I'm a pretty small person. I'm only like 5'1", so the kids were taller than me and they thought they could intimidate me. And I thought, back in the day, mentor teachers would tell you things like, you can't smile until Halloween. Like, don't let the students know you have a personality. And I took that to heart. And I was just a terrible teacher my first 2 years. When I decided to go back to the classroom after 2016, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to be myself to a fault. I'm going to be in every way myself in front of these kids. And that works really well. My students listen to me because when I am myself truly, they understand that they can trust me. They understand that who they're getting in front of them every day is the same person I always was, and that makes them feel safe, right? And so I think when it comes to teaching it, when it comes to organizing and leading people in general, that unabashed authenticity is what works really well. Because my intentions have always been to help people, and when I am myself in every way, they see that, right? They understand that they can trust me. And
so how does that carry over into your community organizing?
When I first started thinking about running for office, I was maybe like 26, 27 years old, and I had some friends who were like, hey, you should run for office. And I thought, well, but I don't have a suit, and like, I don't know that much about politics or policy. Why should I run for office? And several of my friends who had, either worked on campaigns or had done it themselves before were like, you don't need any of those things. Just be yourself. Like, your community, you know what the issues are, you know what it's like to live there. You know what your neighbors are thinking because you talk to them. So just be yourself. And so when I did my photo shoot for my campaign, I was like, well, I'm at least going to wear a blazer. So I got like a bright pink blazer, right? And I thought, like, this will be the person, like, I'm going to have my campaign have personality. It's going to feel like me. And that's what's going to resonate with voters. And sure enough, you know, it did. It didn't, I know I didn't win, but I do consider that campaign extremely successful because I never compromised my values once. I never compromised my identity, my story, my supporters. I had the opportunity throughout the entire thing, even despite challenges, to be myself. And, you know, voters would have gotten what they saw. And I think that's so important that if we could just infuse more of that into politics, then people will hate it a little bit less.
Yeah, it's very important to, I think, change our political the whole structure and the way people and the reasons people get involved and what happens after they get involved. But is it possible to do that?
I think it is if we stop thinking about politics. Like, a lot of people think politics is about the politician and that political campaigns are about the politician. If we stop thinking about campaigns in that way and we start thinking about campaigns as community organizing at its peak, then politics gets to change, right? A campaign then isn't about the person whose name is on the ballot. It's not about the person whose face is on the mailer. It's about the people you are trying to represent. So when I ran my campaign, I took a really different approach than what I've seen before. I've seen some of my friends do this, but when I started going door to door, it wasn't to talk about me and who I was. It was to have conversations with my neighbors about what issues they cared about. So when I went to someone's door, or when my volunteers went to someone's door, it wasn't, hi, I'm Jennifer Love Tang, and I'm running for council, and this is who I am. Let me tell you my entire resume and why I'm qualified. It was, hey, my name's Jennifer, I live down the street from you, I'm running for council, and what are some of the issues you care about? What are the things that are impacting your life in the community that you would like to see improved? And so I got to engage my neighbors, thousands of them, right, in conversations about life in our city. And so that is, I think, what campaigns should be about, rather than some sort of beauty pageant.
Well, and you're at the local level, which I believe politics is most effective at the local level.
I agree with that. We had 6,600 voters in my district, and they all heard from me at least at one point. And it, you know, enabled us to talk about transportation or housing or the airplanes or whatever the case was. And that's how you can be responsive.
Earlier, you had mentioned that one of your proudest achievements was allowing kids who felt transgender, I think you said, come out in your classroom. I'm curious, what is your view on why there seems to be an increase in this, or rather a pushing for more and more acceptance of this more recently?
I think there's been more visibility around gender identity issues. So I remember the first workshop I went to maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, where everybody was asked to introduce themselves, their name, where they came from, and their gender pronouns. And I remember the first time I did that, I was like, this is very weird. Like, why do you need me to tell you that my pronouns are she, her, right? But I thought about it, and I was like, well, it doesn't impact me negatively to do that. So if it makes anybody else feel safer, then why should I care that I do this? This is a practice that is inclusive, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember doing that for several years, and it just became more and more widespread in various spaces that I was in. I think now, because of social media activism, my students have the terminology to be able to think about their gender identity and then feel safe enough to come out to other people that also have that shared vocabulary. I think before social media activism, someone might be transgender and not have the words to communicate that to someone, right? Or might not have other people that had a shared understanding, even if they didn't have a shared identity. I also learned during my campaign that the Planned Parenthood in Alhambra at the time, so about 1.5 years ago, was one of the only clinics in Southern California that offered transgender care. And that, I was so surprised. I was like, wow, here in the San Gabriel Valley, like there's a clinic that provides transgender care. And the director of that clinic told me, yeah, you know, people come from San Diego, they come from hours away to be able to get care here. And that just really opened my mind to the fact that people who are not cisgender are here, and that visibility is just becoming more and more frequent.
What is transgender care?
I'm not the right person to answer this exactly, but my understanding is that it's care that takes into consideration one's gender identity, right? So if somebody might be taking certain hormones or whatever the case is, that healthcare takes all of that into consideration.
I see. So I'm under the opinion that gender is largely a social construct, mostly because when I think about how you describe what society deems masculine or feminine, that those attributes can be attributed to both male and female. And part of the reason that this is, I would say, an important topic for me is because I'm married, I have a wife, and I have 2 young daughters. And so my concern is, first and foremost, that these are people, you know, and not to lessen their struggles and what they go through, but to uphold the rights and the concerns for women. This is my concern, and the outworking of the thinking, what that looks like down the road and what is happening now. And this is, you know, just a conversation. This has nothing to do with you. I just wanted to have this conversation. The scary things that look like, you know, biological males in female prisons and spaces, and taking away female, I'll say their opportunities in many areas, sports, that is a concern for my girls, right? Like, what is going to be left for them in areas that are supposed to be for females? I'm just wondering if that conversation or that thought has occurred with you.
You know, I've certainly had conversations around this, and I think that it's more, I think we have to kind of zoom out when we look at this topic. Right now, our world and our institutions, whether it be sports or education or anything, right, is set up for a binary world, right? It's set up for women and men. And I think that as transgender and as transgender issues and just non-cisgender people become more visible, that we will then start to hopefully build institutions and systems that make space for them, right? Right now, I think the controversy is like trying to fit people who don't fit into this binary system. And I think over time, we will start to be able to create infrastructure and systems that will accommodate everyone in ways that don't take away from existing groups, right? That's my
women.
hope.
Mostly women. It's mostly taking away from women.
Yeah.
That is the concern, because it's not men who are losing spaces. It's not men who are, you know, losing opportunity. It's mostly women, and including safety. The binary system, I understand that there is a system set up, and for the most part, there it is because of the vast differences in biology, and that's more so what I'm referring to, and I think the issues surrounding transgender is not so much biology, but more where they feel accepted, and how they feel that they fit in. But it sort of discounts the reality of physical difference. And I'm just wondering if that's, excuse me, I'm just wondering if that's also part of the conversation, you know, because you are actually around young people who you're influencing their thought and how they view things. And there's so much more outworking. Whenever I have these conversations, I enjoy difficult conversations. So I think that they should be had, and dialogue should happen. And so I always try to mention these things, because I think they're far removed from, can you treat a person with respect, right? And that's really how you can galvanize people around this. But to never mention what happens over here, I think is also a disservice. But anyway, I'll leave that for another show topic. Unless you want to say something else.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's interesting that you bring up these issues. To be frank, like outside of kind of intellectual spaces, haven't really thought of that, because with my students, it's like kind of it's all about survival. It's all about making them feel safe enough that they can survive adolescence. And the reason why I say that is because I was in a political training for women only, self-identified women about 2 years ago. And there was a transgender woman who was in my class. And she was older, maybe like in her late 50s, early 60s. And she said something that really, really stuck with me, which was, all of my friends are dead. She said that all of her transgender friends had either been murdered or had committed suicide throughout her lifetime. And when my students started coming out, I've only had two students come out to me as transgender. It's not like it's like a bunch of them, right? But when my students shared their identities with me, it really was a matter of like survival and helping them understand that they had value in this world, even though they weren't yet accepted. And so that's kind of where the conversation has lied for me. And I think this issue of like, how do we build systems and structures that are beneficial to all people of all genders, and how do we bring it out of the binary is important, and not necessarily where I'm at in my work. It's more so like helping folks understand, like, yes, you might be transgender. Yes, you may be non-binary. Yes, you may be whatever the case is, and you deserve to live. Because at 14, 15 years old, that's kind of where it's at right now.
Yeah, it is really sad, the rate of suicide in that group. I think nationally it's 3%, and in that group it's 40%.
Wow.
Yeah. I actually very, very much appreciate you having that conversation with me. And I think that these conversations should happen, and people should be able to dialogue on both sides. We're going to move on to another segment of this show where we get to learn a little bit about you and what you like in the San Gabriel Valley. And this is one of my favorite parts of the show because I get to learn different things, different places to go. So we'll get right to it.
All right, so we call it the SGV3. So these would be three of your favorites, whether it's places or things to do, events, memories, what you have in the San Gabriel Valley. So what would be number one?
So do all of your guests tell you that this is really hard?
Yeah.
Yes.
But you'll be surprised at how many very similar answers we get.
I didn't realize how hard it was until I had to do it.
I've been thinking about this all week, and I honestly still haven't figured out what I'm going to say for my third one. But
Okay.
so it's summertime right now, and one thing that I was thinking about was before the 2008 recession, Alhambra used to have this really amazing street festival music thing called Summer Jubilee. I don't know if any of you have been to it, but when I was in high school and in college, that was where I would go like every weekend. They would close like 1st Street and 2nd Street off Main in Alhambra and put up this massive stage, and there would be booths and musicians would play. And I remember I saw the Beach Boys one year.
Wow.
And John Stamos was with them. And I remember I was in high school and I'm like, I'm going to get to the front. And I remember pushing people out of the way so I could be in the front to see the Beach Boys. And when I was younger, I would go to shows all the time. I'd go to rock shows like every other week. I'd drive out to Hollywood because I loved music. And there just wasn't really anything like that in the San Gabriel Valley, except for Summer Jubilee. And we'd have that, and then my friends and I had a bunch of really weird friends in high school. We were like a bunch of people who had bands, and we would put on these like backyard music festivals at people's houses, like whenever somebody's parents went away for a weekend. And all the different like high school bands would come out and they'd play, and they would all have names like Monster Fest or whatever the case was. And Summer Jubilee was kind of like our model for that because, Coachella wasn't a thing yet. Yeah.
So is that still, maybe last year it wouldn't have happened, but is it still around? Or?
No, No, so they stopped doing it during the 2008 recession, if I remember correctly, and it hasn't been back. But hopefully, Alhambra, you bring it back someday.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's too bad that they've stopped that. A lot of memories you have of that.
Yeah. I saw the Fab Four one year.
Oh, wow.
And it was just like,
Well,
amazing.
it's like having the Beatles there.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad she mentioned the Fab Four because, the Beatles are my own personal gods. Okay, how about number 2?
Okay, number 2 is the Bruggemeyer Library in Monterey Park.
That's actually really special to me, but please continue.
Oh, I want to hear why. So I'd be remiss not to mention the Bruggemeyer Library. I'm a sitting board member for the library. And just a little bit of history. So back in the day, like before I lived in Monterey Park, there was an English-only movement in Monterey Park. There was this council member, maybe he was the mayor, who was very upset by the increase in Asians in the city. And so they were trying to pass an ordinance to make everything in the city English only, like the street signs, the business signs, things like that, including the books in the library.
Oh, wow.
So they were trying to get rid of all the foreign language books in the library.
Oh.
And there are people who can tell this story much better than I can, but at the time, Mike Ng and Judy Chu were involved in the community, and this was kind of like their fight to enable the library to continue to have foreign language books. It's a famous law case, actually, as Mike tells me, and the library's board was then separated from city council control. So we we exist alongside city council. And today there's nothing controversial like that happening, but the library is really special to me because of its civil rights history and just because I spent like all of my childhood there.
All of her childhood. So that's why it's special to me. So it actually was like my babysitter. Mm-hmm. So I would go to school at Inez. After school, I was instructed to go straight to the library, stay there until my mom would pick me up. And no one ever like questioned or said anything or kicked me out. And then I would figure out like, okay, I had time to go to the park and play, or Chano's, or, Baskin Robbins, or there was a liquor store there on Garfield. And, there's these wall of windows looking out. And when it's light out, you can't look in. And when it's dark out, you can only look in and you can't look out. It's interesting, right? So as the year changed, I had to be outside at a certain time so my mom could see me. My mom was very impatient. So if she drove in and I wasn't there, she'd drive out and go home. And that happened, a dozen times. But so yeah, I spent many, many years there looking at a lot of books, and just basically I almost lived there after school.
Wow.
Yeah. Same. Yeah. I would go there all the time for group projects. I would know the names of the various library clerks. Some of them are the same ones that are there now. Yeah. And so it has a really special place in my heart. And they, the Library Foundation, the board, they put on these big events every year to raise money for the library. And it's just such a special place.
Are they reopened now?
Not fully, but yes. So during the pandemic, they were doing contactless checkout, and they were also delivering books to seniors who were checking them out. And they've managed to fare really well during the pandemic, and the city librarian, Diana Garcia, is just spectacular. And so I know that, it's going to continue to be a really special place for the next generation.
Oh, great.
Oh, Barnes Park. That's the park that's adjacent to it.
Yeah, right. So have you had time to think of number 3?
Yes. Okay. So I can't do this without talking about food.
Yeah.
So I was trying to think of like a specific restaurant I would talk about, but I can't because there's too many and we'd be here forever. But the like quintessential SGV dining experience I think about is dim sum. And that's just been such an important part of weekends since I was born. And so we used to drive out here when we lived in Chinatown to go have dim sum and go grocery shopping like every weekend. And in kind of where I live in Monterey Park, kind of along Atlantic and Garvey, there's like a bunch of different dim sum places, right? There's NBC, there's Tang, there's the other one on Atlantic and Garvey, I can't remember the name of, Capital Seafood.
Ocean Star.
Ocean
That's closed,
Star.
I think.
Yeah, it's closed now.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was Ocean Star.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's Atlantic dim sum in that plaza above 24 Hour Fitness. And I just, like, sometimes when I go to other places, I just think about, like, where else in the world can you be within, like, a half square mile of, like, 4 different dim sum places?
Right. Yeah, that intersection really did have these huge palaces, NBC and, the other ones you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. And, at nighttime, they're usually used for banquets, right?
Yes,
so I've been to so many weddings throughout childhood, just at those restaurants. My dad's friends used to manage a couple of them. At dim sum, you always have to wait for a long time for a table. But my dad would just, like, bribe the managers so that we could get a table right away. And so he had friends at every single one. And when I became an adult and started going to dim sum myself, I was like, wait, I have to wait for an hour?
Yeah.
Wait, did you have a favorite one?
It's funny. My absolute favorite one is not in that intersection. It's actually in Rosemead.
Oh, Sea Harbor?
Yes. Sea Harbor.
That's Scott's friend.
Yeah, Sea Harbor is, it's a very, very high quality, high standard.
The first time I ever had their gam sa pao, my mind was blown. Like, it just comes out of the bun and it burns your mouth a little bit if you're not careful. And it's just amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. That is one of the very first, top rated Chinese restaurants in the LA area.
So I love dim sum. I love so much about it. But what about dim sum is memorable for you?
I think it's growing up, I read a lot of books, and in the books I read, all the characters were white folks, and they went to church on Sunday mornings, right? And I never went to church on Sunday mornings, but we would go to dim sum every Sunday morning, and there was such a ritual to it. The getting up early, the putting on your best clothes. We'd always bring our own tea, and there was always, like, a group of people that we would kind of rotate out who we went with, and it's just such a special experience in that way. I remember the first time we ever met my aunt's new boyfriend was at dim sum, right? For my dad's 60th birthday, it was dim sum. For, like, every milestone, right, it was always, let's go get dim sum. And all of those experiences of sitting there and just the cacophony of, like, being in a dim sum restaurant and trying to have a conversation with your loved ones is just so beautiful to me. And somebody needs to write a story about this if they haven't already. I
think for Russell, it would probably be the food itself that you like.
It's all of it together. I prefer the noise. I prefer, there's a whole bunch of people out in front, someone screaming a number, the carts, going around, the lady, like, high pressuring you to eat something, and you're saying that you're full and they talk you into something else. Like, I love that whole experience of it. But I remember Ocean Star and certainly NBC, and if you live in the San Gabriel Valley, or if you're not from here, to call it a restaurant is sort of a disservice, right? They're enormous.
Oh yeah, they're huge palaces. And it's funny. You may think, well, I'm just some white guy, but actually, for me, dim sum has been a very, very big part of my life for 35 years, and I have every number of memories that you have. And yeah, it's Sunday mornings, and I never liked going to dim sum, but I had to go because my family, was Chinese, and we had to go. It was just that simple. But it was always these, memories of these big cavernous places with the carts and the noise, the cacophony as you describe it, and chicken feet, okay, which I've never really enjoyed, but anyway.
Well, I also like the military, like, execution of the staff. You knew who did what because of the way that they were dressed.
Yeah.
Someone got up and that the countertop was cleared off and all the dishes were placed on, like, within a second, and then the next people were within a few seconds.
You're right. Yeah,
that was always very impressive.
There used to be a big one down in Chinatown too. I forget the name of it.
Was it Empress Pavilion?
Yes, Empress Pavilion. Yeah. Right, where they used to have, again, all these political events at night. But it was a huge place in that shopping mall.
Yeah. I worry a lot about as Ocean Star has closed, and I worry a lot about how these restaurants will fare in the future and what will become of these spaces. Because I walked by Empress Pavilion maybe about a year ago, and it's closed now.
Yeah.
And that plaza has become kind of a ghost town.
Yeah. But you like Lunasia, Russell.
In Alhambra.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of difference between Alhambra and Pasadena.
Oh, okay. But it's not that traditional dim sum experience.
So
that's how it's kind of trending, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm hungry. Now I actually want to go eat. Lunasia is open, I think, till 7 or something.
Okay.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your story with us. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
I am on Instagram at Jennifer Love Tang. So just my full name, Jennifer Love Tang.
Is your last name spelled T-A-I-N-G?
No, T-A-N-G.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about the love. Can you share that?
Yeah. So there's several other Jennifer Tangs in Monterey Park. So when I ran for office, I was like, I need to put my middle name in here so people don't get confused. But my middle name is Love. It has nothing to do with Jennifer Love Hewitt. In my Chinese name, one of the characters is Love. So my full Chinese name in Mandarin is Chen Aixing. So the I was added to my middle name when the nurse asked my mom if she wanted to give me a middle name.
Great. Well, Jennifer, I appreciate you spending this time with us, and I wish you the best of luck if you plan on running in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Let us know, and you can come back. Yeah. Well, thanks again for tuning in and spending this time with us. If you're new to the show, consider subscribing and leave us a comment. You can visit us on our website, sgvmasterkey.com, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks for checking out another episode of the SGV Master Key. You can find the full back catalog of the SGV Master Key at sgvmasterkey.com and wherever you get your podcasts. This show was produced and edited by Russell Mono and Victoria Allers of Kind Monster Productions. Thanks again for listening or watching. We'll see you again real soon in the next episode.
Nice mother. No, kind mother.